The Xylosian hive ship sovereign of flesh hung in the void like a wound in space. Its organic hull pulsed with a rhythm that had swallowed 12 star systems, its membranous surface rippling as millions of neural parasites drifted through its internal channels, dreaming of new hosts. Commander Vextel observed the blue marble rotating beneath them through an ocular membrane that wept phosphorescent tears, an autonomic response to the proximity of conquest. Terra 3, intoned the navigation officer, its central ganglion pulsing with reverence. Primitive, a Class 4 death world, but the indigenous species shows promising neural architecture. Vextel's tendrils twitched. Death worlds were always the most fertile hunting grounds. The host species of such planets developed complex defense mechanisms, sophisticated social structures, physical adaptations that made them exceptional vessels for Xylosian consciousness. The jungle worlds, the volcanic hellscapes, the sub-zero wastelands, these had produced the most resilient hosts. Terra 3's atmosphere was a chemical cocktail of nitrogen and oxygen, its gravity crushing, its ecosystem a tapestry of predators and prey locked in perpetual war. The transport vessel has been isolated, the navigation officer continued. Single occupant, minimal defense systems, it appears to be a research vessel. Send the boarding party. Vextel's voice was a subsonic tremor that vibrated through the ship's organic deck. I want the host contained before any other Terran vessels arrive. The Sovereign extended a docking tendril, a muscular tube of living tissue that stretched across 20 kilometers of vacuum and latched onto the Terran transport like a leech finding a vein. The boarding party, led by infiltrator Kayril, slithered through the connection, their bodies adapted for the specific purpose of neural assimilation. Was a veteran of 7 conquests, their tendrils scarred from previous insertions, their ganglion twice the size of an ordinary Xylosian. Pride pulsed through their neural nodes as they breached the human vessel's hull. The interior was primitive, metal walls, artificial lighting. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and something else, something acrid and sharp. Kayril's chemoreceptors registered the compound but dismissed it. The humans likely used it as a cleaning agent. Such simple creatures, with their reliance on chemical rather than biological technology. They found the human in the command center. She was small, a bipedal form covered in a fabric skin, her 2 visual organs fixed on a glowing display. When she turned to face them, Kayril noticed the fine tremors in her limbs, the dilation of her pupils, the shallow breathing. Signs of fear. Good. Fear made the assimilation process smoother. What the hell are you? The human demanded, her vocal apparatus producing sounds that the Xylosian translator implant interpreted as a request for identification. Kayril didn't answer. Such creatures had no right to question their conquerors. Instead, the boarding party released their paralytic spores, a fine mist that settled on the human skin and forced her muscles into sudden, complete stillness. She collapsed to the deck, her visual organs still tracking their movements, her breathing now rapid and shallow. Kayril approached the fallen host. Their tendrils extended, seeking the entry points along the human spinal column where the nervous system was most accessible. This was the sacred moment, the moment of union, the moment when a Xylosian consciousness abandoned its temporary body and merged with a new vessel, taking command of flesh and bone and turning a mind into a home. But hesitated, something was wrong. The human's internal chemistry was chaotic. Kayril's sensory tendrils tasted the blood, the cerebrospinal fluid, the electrochemical signals firing through the neural pathways. There was an excess of something, a foreign compound that saturated every tissue, every cell, every synapse. It pulsed through the human's veins like a second heartbeat, a chemical storm waiting for the right trigger. Kayril dismissed the warning. The host was primitive. Any internal chemical imbalance could be corrected once the assimilation was complete. With a surge of will, Kayril detached from their external form and plunged their consciousness into the human's nervous system. The first moment of contact was always euphoric, the sensation of finding a new home, of feeling the host's own consciousness ripple with confusion and fear as the Zalosian presence asserted dominance. Kairil began the takeover, reaching for the human's brainstem, the ancient seat of autonomic control, where the true conquest began. Then the burning started. At first it was a dull warmth, unpleasant but manageable. The human system was fighting back, as all hosts did, had experienced such resistance before. They intensified their grip on the neural pathways, forcing the human's consciousness into submission. The warmth became heat, the heat became fire, and the fire became agony. Kairil's tendrils recoiled as their synaptic nodes began to degrade. The foreign compound in the human system had activated. No, it had been waiting. It flooded the synaptic cleft with a chemical assault that shredded Kairil's neural connections like paper in a hurricane. Every interface point where had attached to the human's neurons erupted in toxic flame. What is this? Kairil's consciousness screamed through the ship's collective network. What is happening? The human's brain, this primitive, simple organ, was a battlefield, and was losing. The compound was everywhere, a chemical defense mechanism that the Zalosian sensory nodes could not identify. It blocked Kairil's neural receptors, saturated their communication channels, and worst of all, stimulated the human's neurons to fire with such intensity that Kairil's own consciousness was drowned in the noise. Kairil tried to withdraw. They pulled their tendrils back, seeking escape from the inferno. But the human's nervous system wouldn't release them. The chemical had bonded to Kairil's neural tissue, fusing them to the host in a death grip. Commander Vextel felt it when Kairil died. It was a brief, sharp sensation, like a chord snapping in an orchestra of millions. A single note of agony that echoed through the sovereign's collective consciousness, and then silence. Vextel's central ganglion throbbed with the shock of it. Kairil was dead. A veteran of 7 conquests, a warrior of the first clutch, reduced to nothing. In the human vessel, the boarding party watched in horror as their infiltrators' tendrils, now detached from their external form, liquefied inside the human host's spinal column. The organic matter that had been Kairil's consciousness dissolved into a foul-smelling paste that oozed from the human skin, coagulating in dark stains on the deck. The human gasped. Her muscles relaxed as the paralytic spores wore off, or perhaps as the chemical in her system burned them away. She sat up, her visual organs wide, her face pale. She looked at the liquefied remains of Kairil's consciousness on the deck, then at the remaining boarding party members. "Get off my ship," she said. Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had just watched an invader die at her feet and felt nothing but annoyance at the mess. The Zalosian boarding party retreated to the docking tendril, their central ganglia screaming with confusion and fear. They had conquered worlds. They had assimilated species far more powerful than this one. But they had never encountered anything that could kill a Zalosian by simply existing. Vextel received the boarding party's report through the collective network. The words tumbled over each other: fire, acid, dissolving, agony, chaos. Vextel's tendrils curled tight with anxiety. "Contain the human," Vextel ordered. "Do not attempt assimilation. Do not approach the host's nervous system. Bring me the body. I want to know what killed Kairil." The answer would change everything. The human was transferred to the sovereign's central research chamber, a vast organic cavity lined with pulsating membranes that analyzed every molecule in the atmosphere. Vextel observed through a viewing node as the boarding party secured the human to a restraining slab, their movements careful and terrified, as if they expected her to explode at any moment. She didn't explode. She sat on the slab, her visual organs scanning the chamber with clinical detachment, and waited. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice translated through an implant that the boarding party had forced into her auditory canal. "I was under the impression that you people were conquerors. What happened to the hostile takeover? Vextel's sensory nodes prickled with something that might have been anger if Zalosians had such an emotion. What did you do to my infiltrator? The human tilted her head, a gesture that Vextel had learned denoted confusion among Terran species. I didn't do anything. Your slimy friend tried to crawl into my brain and something went wrong. That's not my problem. Your system contained a chemical agent that dissolved Kril's neural tissue within seconds. The human blinked. Chemical agent, I'm a xenobiologist, I don't carry weapons. Vextel activated the chamber's analysis systems. Organic sensors swept over the human's body, cataloging every compound in her bloodstream, every metabolic byproduct in her tissues, every chemical signature in her cells. The data streamed into the collective network, and Vextel's ganglion throbbed with the enormity of what they were seeing. The human's blood was a soup of compounds that the Zalosian database could only partially identify. Some were standard organic molecules, amino acids, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, but others were foreign, unstable, volatile. One compound in particular caught Vextel's attention. Its molecular structure was simple, a fusion of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, in a configuration that Zalosian biochemistry had never encountered. It was present in the human's bloodstream at concentrations that would be fatal to a Zalosian. It saturated her cerebral spinal fluid. It had bonded to her neural receptors like a parasite of its own. And it was the same compound that had killed Kril. What is this? Vextel demanded, displaying the molecular structure on a bioscreen. What is this substance in your system? The human leaned forward, squinting at the display. Her visual organs widened slightly, and for the first time, a hint of genuine surprise crossed her features. That's caffeine, she said. Vextel's tendrils curled. Caffeine, explain. Caffeine is a stimulant. The human sat back, folding her arms in a gesture that Vextel interpreted as defensiveness. It's a naturally occurring compound found in certain plants on Earth. We consume it to improve focus, reduce fatigue, enhance cognitive function. Some people drink it every day, multiple times a day. You consume this substance intentionally. Not just consume. The human's voice carried a note of pride that Vextel found deeply unsettling. We cultivate it. It's one of the most widely used psychoactive substances in human history. There are entire industries built around it. Coffee shops, tea houses, energy drink manufacturers. We've developed methods to extract it, concentrate it, purify it. We even have people who consume it in capsules, pure caffeine powder ingested orally. Vextel's consciousness reeled. The human was describing the deliberate, systematic intake of a compound that had just killed one of the most experienced infiltrators in the Zalosian fleet. And they did it for pleasure, for productivity, for fun. Your species consumes a neural toxin as a recreational activity, Vextel said, the words tasting strange in their subsonic form. It's not a toxin to us, it's a stimulant. It blocks our adenosine receptors. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that promotes sleep and relaxation. Caffeine prevents it from binding, which makes us more alert, more energetic, more what? More dangerous. The word hung in the organic air between them. The human's expression hadn't changed. She was still calm, still clinical, still treating this conversation like a scientific exchange. But Vextel detected something beneath her surface. A warning, an edge. Explain the mechanism, Vextel demanded, forcing their consciousness back into focus. How does this substance, this caffeine, kill a Zalosian? Min shrugged. I don't know how your biology works, but I can guess. You tried to interface with my nervous system, right? Established synaptic connections. Caffeine is highly active in the synapse. It floods the synaptic cleft and prevents adenosine from binding to receptors. If your neural tissue has any receptors similar to ours, which I imagine it must since you tried to take over my brain, then the caffeine in my system would have attached to those receptors and I don't know. Burned them out. Overstimulated them. Your nervous system is probably used to a stable chemical environment. My system is anything but stable. She gestured to herself. I'm a walking chemical storm. I always have been. We all are. It's what keeps us awake during 12-hour research shifts. Vextel processed the information through the collective network. The data was horrifying. The humans, these primitive, fragile, weak humans, had evolved alongside a substance that was lethal to Xylosian biology, but they hadn't evolved defenses against it. They had evolved dependence on it. They consumed it willingly, and their systems had adapted to tolerate its presence, even welcome it. The implications were staggering. If this single human, this one unremarkable specimen, had enough caffeine in her system to kill K-Ril, what would happen if the Xylosian fleet encountered an entire planet of humans? A planet where these creatures cultivated this neural poison, refined it, concentrated it, and consumed it in vast quantities daily. Vextel received a transmission from the medical assessment chamber. Senior biologist Threx had analyzed the data and confirmed the findings. But there was more. Threx had discovered something that made Vextel's central ganglion pulse with dread. The caffeine in the human system wasn't a defensive adaptation. It wasn't a biological weapon. It was a dietary choice. The human had consumed caffeine approximately 3 hours before the Xylosian attack. The amount in her system was considered typical for her species. Low, even. Threx, Vextel transmitted through the network. What are the upper limits of caffeine consumption in this species? Threx's response was hesitant, frightened. Commander, I don't believe you want to know. Tell me. Some humans consume quantities that would be lethal to Xylosians 1,000 times over. They consume it in concentrated forms, extracts, powders. They have developed methods to deliver massive doses of the compound in a single ingestion. I have found records of humans consuming quantities that would dissolve a Xylosian's neural tissue on contact. And these humans survive. They thrive. They do it intentionally, Commander. They call it productivity. Vextel's consciousness spiraled. The human species wasn't just dangerous. They were insane. They had turned a lethal toxin into a cultural phenomenon. They had built civilizations around a substance that was, to any other species in the galaxy, a weapon of mass destruction. And they had no idea. The human on the slab shifted, drawing Vextel's attention. So, she said, her voice casual, what happens now? Vextel didn't have an answer. For the first time in 12 conquests, the Xylosian commander was confronted with a species they couldn't assimilate. A species that had, through sheer chemical madness, rendered themselves immune to the Xylosian way of life. The invasion of Earth had just become significantly more complicated. Senior biologist Threx arrived in the research chamber with an escort of 4 warrior-class Xylosians, their tendrils thick with protective membrane, their ganglia armored against external interference. They positioned themselves around the human's restraining slab like sentinels guarding a weapon of mass destruction, which Threx supposed she was. I need access to her tissue samples, Threx announced, their voice a subsonic tremor. Full genetic analysis, metabolic profiling, chemical mapping of every compound in her system. I want to know everything about this species. The human watched from the slab, her visual organs tracking Threx's movements with unsettling precision. You're the scientist. I am senior biologist Threx. I have cataloged the biology of 23 species across 12 star systems. I have never encountered anything like you. Flattering. The human's vocal apparatus produced a sound that Threx's translator identified as humor, a Terran emotional response that indicated amusement. I'm Dr. Helena Voss, xenobiologist, and I have to say, this is the most interesting first contact I could have imagined. Threx extended a sensory tendril toward the human's arm, where a small sample of blood had been extracted. The warrior-class escorts tensed, their ganglia pulsing with anxiety, but Threx ignored them. The sample was contained in a sterile membrane. Safe. The analysis began. Threx's tendrils interfaced with the sample, their neural nodes cataloging the chemical signatures with mechanical precision. The data streamed into the collective network, and Threx felt the weight of discovery pressing down on their consciousness. The human cellular structure was unremarkable: standard carbon-based life, eukaryotic organization, mitochondria for energy production. But the chemical environment was extraordinary. The caffeine wasn't the only compound of interest. There were others, secondary metabolites that the human system produced in response to the caffeine, enzymes that metabolized it, receptors that bound to it, a whole biochemical infrastructure dedicated to processing and utilizing this lethal substance. Remarkable, Threx murmured. Your species has adapted to the presence of caffeine at the genetic level. You possess specialized enzymes that break it down into less harmful compounds. Your receptors have evolved to be less sensitive to its effects. You've essentially domesticated a poison. Domesticated is a good word for it, Dr. Voss agreed. We've been consuming caffeine for thousands of years. Our ancestors discovered that certain plants had stimulating effects, and we cultivated those plants. We bred them for higher caffeine content. We developed processing methods that concentrated the compound. We turned it into a global industry. A global industry dedicated to producing a substance that would kill any other species in the galaxy. We didn't know that. The human's voice carried a note of defensiveness. We only discovered caffeine's molecular structure in the last few hundred years. Before that, it was just a thing we did, a cultural tradition, a morning ritual. Threx's tendrils curled with fascination. Tell me about this ritual. Dr. Voss described it with evident enthusiasm: the grinding of roasted seeds, the brewing of hot water, the steam rising in ceramic cups. She described the social aspects, the shared experience, the way humans gathered around this beverage to begin their day. She described coffee shops, tea houses, the immense variety of preparation methods across cultures. She described the energy drink phenomenon, a product designed specifically to deliver massive doses of caffeine in a single serving. Some people drink multiple cups a day, she said. Some consume caffeine constantly, from morning until evening. There are people who consume caffeine in quantities that would be fatal to a xylogen in seconds. Threx's ganglion pulsed with horror, and these humans survive. They thrive. Caffeine improves their cognitive function, their reaction times, their ability to focus. It's considered a performance enhancer in many contexts. Athletes use it. Soldiers use it. Students use it to study for exams. It's woven into the fabric of our society. Threx withdrew their tendrils from the blood sample. The analysis was complete, but the implications were only beginning to crystallize. This species had not only evolved to tolerate a lethal poison, they had evolved to depend on it. Their entire civilization was built on a foundation of chemical self-destruction. And they had no idea what they were. Commander Vextel, Threx transmitted through the collective network. I need to speak with you, privately. Vextel arrived within moments, their central ganglion pulsing with barely contained anxiety. What have you discovered? Threx gestured toward the human on the slab. This species is chemically fortified against neural invasion. The caffeine in their systems is just the beginning. There are other compounds, secondary metabolites, byproducts of caffeine metabolism, that are equally lethal to xylogen tissue. Every human on Earth contains a cocktail of neural toxins that would dissolve a xylogen on contact. Then we cannot assimilate them. Correct. Can we neutralize the toxins, treat the humans before assimilation? Threx's tendrils twitched with frustration. The toxins are embedded in their cellular structure. They're produced by their own metabolism. To neutralize them, we would have to fundamentally alter human biochemistry, And even if we could, the humans would never cooperate. They like being caffeinated. It's a core part of their identity. Vextel's consciousness reeled. 12 conquests. 12 star systems conquered, assimilated, brought into the glorious harmony of the Zylosian collective. And now this, a species that had inadvertently weaponized their own biology against the most advanced neural assimilation technology in the galaxy. There's more, Threx continued. I've accessed their public databases. The humans have documented their caffeine consumption extensively. They consider it normal, routine. They have entire scientific disciplines dedicated to studying its effects on the human body. They have developed synthetic versions of the compound. They have found new ways to deliver it, patches, injections, inhalers. They are actively innovating in the field of caffeine delivery. Vextel's tendrils tightened. They're enhancing their chemical defenses. They don't see it as a defense. They see it as a convenience, a way to stay awake during long shifts, a way to enhance productivity. They have no idea that they're creating a biological barrier that is, to us, impenetrable. Threx transmitted a visualization, a map of Earth's caffeine infrastructure, coffee plantations in tropical regions, tea farms in mountainous areas, processing facilities, distribution networks, retail outlets. The scale of it was staggering. Billions of humans consuming millions of tons of caffeine annually, all of it flowing through a global economy that had evolved around a single molecule. This is the enemy, Threx said. This is what we're up against. Not a species with advanced weapons or impenetrable shields. A species that is chemically addicted to their own defense mechanism. A species that will fight us not because they're afraid, but because we're interfering with their morning routine. Vextel studied the visualization. The scope of human caffeine consumption was almost incomprehensible. If even a fraction of that caffeine reached the Zylosian fleet, if the humans weaponized their own biological addiction, the consequences would be catastrophic. We need to report this to the High Council, Vextel said. Agreed, but we need to be careful how we frame it. Why? Threx's tendrils curled with dread. Because the High Council won't see a barrier, they'll see a weapon, and they'll want to capture it. The transmission to the Zylosian High Council took 3 hours to travel across the light years. Vextel spent those hours in the research chamber, watching Dr. Voss sleep, a process that the human's physiology required for approximately 8 hours per day, a vulnerability that would be crippling to any Zylosian consciousness. But sleep wasn't her only vulnerability. She ate food. She drank water. She eliminated waste. She was, in every way, a fragile biological machine. And yet she had killed Caeril without lifting a finger. The High Council's response arrived in the form of a direct neural interface, a connection that bypassed the collective network and connected Vextel's consciousness directly to the Council's central ganglion. Vextel felt the weight of 12 Zylosian leaders pressing against their consciousness, each one demanding answers. Commander Vextel, the Council speaker intoned, your report is extraordinary. It is accurate, Speaker. The Terran species possesses a biological defense mechanism that makes them immune to neural assimilation. Immune? Another council member pulsed with disbelief. No species is immune. We have conquered death worlds. We have assimilated species that evolved in conditions far more hostile than Terra 3. This is different. Vextel transmitted the data from Threx's analysis. The chemical structure of caffeine, the metabolic pathways, the genetic adaptations, the scope of human consumption. The Terrans have not evolved immunity. They have evolved addiction. They consume a substance that is, to Zylosian biology, a lethal neurotoxin, and they consume it in quantities that would be fatal to any Zylosian on contact. The Council's consciousness rippled with shock, 12 tendrils of thought recoiling from the implications. You're telling us, the speaker said slowly, that this species, this primitive, fragile species, has built its civilization around a weapon that is perfectly designed to destroy us. I am telling you that they don't know it's a weapon. To them, it's a stimulant, a productivity enhancer, a cultural tradition. They consume it because it makes them feel good. The council's silence was absolute. Vextel felt the weight of their processing, their analytical nodes working through the implications. A species that had accidentally weaponized their own biology. A species that was too chemically unstable to be safely inhabited. A species that was, in every meaningful way, immune to Xylosian conquest. But the speaker's next words shattered Vextel's hope. Then we must study them, capture specimens, analyze their biological defenses. We cannot allow such a weapon to remain in the hands of a primitive species. The speaker. The danger. The danger is precisely why we must act. The speaker's consciousness pressed against Vextel's with overwhelming force. If the Terrans are immune to our assimilation, they could become a threat. Other species could learn from them, could develop their own defenses. We cannot allow that possibility to exist. Vextel's ganglion pulsed with dread. You're talking about extermination. I am talking about survival. The Xylosian way is assimilation. If a species cannot be assimilated, it must be eliminated. That is the law. That is the tradition. That is the will of the High Council. Speaker, I have studied this species. They are not a threat. They have no idea that we exist. They have no space-faring capability beyond their own solar system. They are. They are a biological anomaly that could destroy everything we have built. The speaker's voice was ice. You will prepare the fleet for a full-scale invasion. You will capture Terran specimens for study. You will neutralize any resistance. And you will do it quickly, before this species becomes aware of the threat they pose to us. The connection severed. Vextel's consciousness snapped back to their own body, their ganglion throbbing with the afterimage of the Council's command. They had anticipated this. They had known that the Council would see a weapon instead of a barrier. But they hadn't anticipated the order to invade. Commander, Threx's voice came through the collective network. What did the Council decide? Vextel looked at Dr. Voss, still sleeping on her restraining slab. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable. A single human, alone in an alien ship, surrounded by creatures who had just decided to exterminate her species. The Council has ordered an invasion, Vextel said. They want to study the humans, capture them, neutralize them. Threx's consciousness recoiled. That's suicide, the caffeine alone. The Council doesn't care. They see the Terrans as a threat. A species that cannot be assimilated is a species that must be destroyed. Dr. Voss stirred on the slab. Her visual organs fluttered open and she gazed at Vextel with an expression that was impossible to read. What's happening? She asked. Why does everything feel so tense? Vextel made a decision. It was a decision that would brand them a traitor, that would shatter their position in the Xylosian hierarchy, that would put their own consciousness at risk. But it was the only decision that made sense. Dr. Voss, Vextel said, I need you to listen carefully. Your species is in danger. The High Council has ordered an invasion of Earth. They want to capture your people and study your biological defenses. They believe you are a threat that must be eliminated. Dr. Voss sat up slowly, her visual organs fixed on Vextel's central ganglion. And what do you believe? Vextel's tendrils curled with the weight of their response. I believe that the Xylosian way is assimilation. I believe that conquest is our nature. But I also believe that some species are not meant to be conquered. Some species are meant to be understood. Understood. I believe that your species is one of them. Vextel's consciousness pulsed with conviction, and I am going to help you. 3 days. That was all the time Vextel had before the invasion fleet arrived. 3 days to convince the High Council that extermination was the wrong choice. 3 days to figure out how to stop a war that had already been declared. Dr. Voss sat in the research chamber, her restraining slab removed, her movements free within the organic confines of the room. She had been given access to the Zalosian information network, a privilege that made the warrior-class guards twitch with anxiety. But Vextal had insisted. If the humans were going to survive, they needed to understand what they were up against. "Your people consume caffeine in massive quantities," Vextal said, projecting data onto a bio screen. "But you've never considered it a weapon." "We consider it a stimulant," Dr. Voss replied. "A mild psychoactive substance. It makes us more alert, more focused, more productive. It's not a weapon, it's a lifestyle." To a Zalosian, it's an acid bath. The caffeine in a single human's bloodstream could kill 100 of my kind. The caffeine in your global supply could sterilize the entire fleet. Dr. Voss's visual organs widened. "You're saying we could defend ourselves with coffee." "I am saying that you have been sitting on a weapon of mass destruction without knowing it. And now, the High Council wants to capture that weapon for themselves." The human's expression shifted, a flicker of something that Vextal's translator identified as defiance. "They want to capture our biological defenses, our caffeine, what? Our caffeine tolerance." Among other things, Vextal transmitted the data from Threx's analysis. "Your species has adapted to caffeine at the genetic level. You possess enzymes that metabolize the compound, receptors that are less sensitive to its effects. You have, in essence, built a biological defense system around a lethal toxin. The Council wants to study that system, to understand how you survive what would kill any other species. And if they figure it out, then they can develop countermeasures. They can modify their own biology to tolerate caffeine, and then they can assimilate Earth." Dr. Voss was silent for a long moment, her visual organs fixed on the bio screen. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "What if we don't let them figure it out?" Vextal's tendrils curled with curiosity. "Explain." "What if we make it clear that Earth is too dangerous to invade? What if we show them exactly what happens to Zalosians who try to assimilate us? The Council has already seen the data. They've already made their decision. Then we need to change their minds." Dr. Voss stood up, packing the organic chamber with a restless energy that reminded Vextal of caffeine-induced agitation. "You said you have 3 days before the invasion fleet arrives. That's 72 hours. In 72 hours, I can show you exactly what your people are up against. I can show you the scale of our caffeine consumption, the infrastructure, the cultural significance, everything that makes caffeine an integral part of human civilization. You want to demonstrate that Earth is unconquerable. I want to demonstrate that Earth is not worth conquering." Dr. Voss's voice carried a conviction that surprised Vextal. "Your people are about to invade a planet where the inhabitants consume lethal neurotoxins as a daily ritual, where they cultivate those toxins on an industrial scale, where they have developed concentrated forms of those toxins that could dissolve a Zalosian on contact. You're about to attack a species that is actively addicted to its own defense mechanism. That's not a war. That's a suicide mission." Vextal processed the words. The logic was sound, but the High Council was not driven by logic. They were driven by fear, fear of a species they couldn't control, fear of a weapon they couldn't capture, fear of a threat they couldn't understand. "What do you propose?" Vextal asked. "I propose a demonstration." Dr. Voss gestured to the bioscreen. "Give me access to your medical facilities. Let me isolate a pure sample of caffeine from my own blood. Then let me show your people exactly what happens when a Zalosian comes into contact with concentrated human biochemistry." A demonstration would require a volunteer. "Then find one. Find a Zalosian who's brave enough or foolish enough to see what we're dealing with." Vextal's tendrils tightened. The human was proposing an act of war, a direct demonstration of their species' biological defenses. The Council would see it as a provocation, a threat, a challenge. But the Council already saw the humans as a threat, and the demonstration might be the only way to make them understand the true scope of the danger. "I will find a volunteer," Vextel said. "But you must understand, if this demonstration fails, if the volunteer survives, the Council will see it as proof that the humans can be conquered." "The volunteer won't survive." Dr. Voss's voice was cold, certain. "I've seen what caffeine does to your people. The concentration in my blood is already lethal to Xylosian biology. If I isolate a pure sample, it will be thousands of times more concentrated. No Xylosian can survive that." Vextel nodded slowly. They had seen the data. They knew the truth of Dr. Voss's words. But there was another truth that Vextel had not yet shared with the human, a truth that would make the demonstration even more dangerous than she realized. Enveth Kairil's mate had been watching, listening, waiting. And Enveth had already transmitted the demonstration data to the High Council. The volunteer arrived within 2 hours. It was a low-caste worker, a Xylosian whose consciousness had never known the glory of assimilation, whose tendrils had never touched a host's nervous system. Its central ganglion was small, its biological structure simple. It was, in every way, expendable. Dr. Voss studied the volunteer through the observation membrane. "It doesn't know what's going to happen." "It has been informed of the risks," Vextel replied. "It volunteered willingly. It is curious about the substance that killed Kairil." "Curious?" Dr. Voss's voice carried a note of something, pity perhaps. "It's going to die for curiosity. Many Xylosians have died for less." The demonstration chamber was a large organic cavity, its walls lined with analytical sensors that would catalog every molecular interaction in real time. The volunteer was secured to a restraining slab similar to the one that had held Dr. Voss, its tendrils spread, its central ganglion exposed. A robotic arm extended from the ceiling, carrying a small syringe filled with a clear liquid. Dr. Voss's blood, isolated, concentrated, a pure sample of human caffeine drawn from a species that had domesticated a poison. "Begin the demonstration," Vextel ordered. The robotic arm descended. The syringe pierced the volunteer's ganglion. The caffeine entered the Xylosian's neural tissue. For a moment, nothing happened. The volunteer's central ganglion pulsed with normal rhythm, its tendrils twitching with what might have been anticipation. Then the rhythm changed, quickened, became erratic. The volunteer's consciousness transmitted through the collective network, a burst of confusion, then pain, then absolute terror. The caffeine was flooding the neural tissue, saturating the synaptic connections, binding to receptors that had never been designed to accept such a compound. The volunteer's neural nodes began to degrade, their molecular structures dissolving under the chemical assault. The volunteer screamed. It wasn't a sound. Xylosians didn't produce sound. It was a psychic cry, a neural pulse of agony that rippled through the collective network and touched every consciousness on the sovereign of flesh. Vextel felt it. Threx felt it. Every Xylosian on the ship felt it. The volunteer's ganglion began to liquefy. The organic membrane that contained its consciousness dissolved, spilling neural fluid across the restraining slab. The volunteer's tendrils curled and stiffened, their tissue melting into a foul-smelling paste. Within seconds, the volunteer was dead. Dr. Voss watched through the observation membrane, her face pale but her expression steady. "That's what happens," she said quietly. "That's what happens to any Xylosian who comes into contact with concentrated caffeine, and we have billions of humans on Earth, all of them saturated with that substance, all of them carrying a weapon that can dissolve your kind on contact." Vextel's tendrils curled with the weight of the demonstration. The data was irrefutable. The humans were a biological hazard to the Xylosian species. Any attempt to assimilate them would result in immediate death. But the demonstration had another effect, one that Vextel hadn't anticipated. Enveth had been watching, and Enveth had transmitted the footage to the High Council. Vextal felt the connection when it happened, a sharp pulse of neural energy that bypassed the collective network and reached directly into the Council's consciousness. Enveth's voice echoed through the connection, filled with triumph. "Council, you have seen the demonstration. The humans possess a weapon designed to destroy us, a weapon that they cultivate willingly, a weapon that they are, even now, preparing to use against us. We must strike first. We must destroy Earth before the humans realize what they have." The Council's response was immediate. "Commander Vextal, you have allowed a Terran to demonstrate a weapon against our kind. You have shown us the depth of the threat. The invasion fleet will depart within the hour. You will prepare your forces for combat." Vextal's consciousness reeled. The demonstration had backfired. Instead of showing the Council that Earth was unconquerable, Enveth had shown them that Earth was too dangerous to ignore. The Council hadn't been dissuaded. They had been convinced that the humans were a threat that must be eliminated before they could turn their chemical weapon against the Xylosian species. "Council, I implore you." "The invasion is ordered, Commander. Your only remaining duty is to carry it out, or be branded a traitor." The connection severed. Vextal's consciousness snapped back to their own body, their ganglion throbbing with the weight of the Council's command. They had failed. They had tried to prevent a war, and they had accelerated it instead. Dr. Voss appeared at Vextal's side, her visual organs wide with alarm. "What happened? What did the Council say?" "They have ordered the invasion," Vextal replied. "They saw the demonstration as proof that Earth must be destroyed. Enveth, Kairil's mate, transmitted the footage to the Council. They believe you are too dangerous to allow to exist." Dr. Voss's expression shifted, a flicker of something that Vextal's translator identified as anger. "Then we have no choice." "No choice." "We fight." Dr. Voss's voice was ice. "We show them that Earth is not just dangerous. We show them that Earth is deadly. We show them that any attempt to invade our home will result in the complete annihilation of their species." Vextal's tendrils curled with dread. "You're proposing genocide." "I'm proposing survival." Dr. Voss met Vextal's central ganglion with unwavering determination. "Your people have decided to destroy us. We have the right to defend ourselves, and we have the means to defend ourselves. The same caffeine that killed your volunteer can be weaponized, concentrated, delivered in massive quantities to your fleet. Your entire invasion force could be destroyed in hours." Vextal's consciousness spiraled. The human was proposing an act of total war, a preemptive strike against the invasion fleet that would eliminate any possibility of Xylosian conquest. It was madness. It was also, Vextal realized, the only option. "Threx," Vextal transmitted through the collective network. "Prepare the research chamber. We have work to do." The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Dr. Voss would use the Xylosian communication network to transmit a message to Earth, a warning of the invasion, accompanied by detailed instructions for weaponizing caffeine against the fleet. The humans would have 24 hours to prepare their defenses. Then the invasion would arrive. But Vextal had another plan, a backup plan that Dr. Voss did not know about. "Threx," Vextal transmitted privately. "The synthetic host project, how close are you to completion?" Threx's response was hesitant. "Commander, the project is theoretical at best. We have identified the neural substrates required for Xylosian consciousness, but the biological synthesis. Can it be done? Perhaps, with the right genetic material, with the right environmental conditions, with time. But Commander, we don't have time. The invasion fleet arrives in 24 hours. Then we make time." Vextal's plan was audacious. They would surrender. They would allow the invasion fleet to capture the Sovereign of Flesh, to assume command of the Xylosian forces. But they would also give Dr. Voss and her people a chance to fight back. The humans would have their chemical weapons. The Zalosian fleet would face an enemy that they couldn't assimilate, couldn't conquer, couldn't defeat. And when the Council realized the true cost of their invasion, Vextal would present the Synthetic Host Project as an alternative. An alternative to conquest, Vextal explained to Dr. Voss. A way for Zalosians to survive without needing to assimilate other species. Synthetic hosts, biological vessels that can sustain our consciousness without the risk of chemical contamination. Your species has the technology to help us develop them. Our species has the knowledge to build them. Together, we could create a new way of life for my people. Dr. Voss studied Vextal with a wary expression. And what do you get out of this? Survival. Vextal's tendrils curled with earnestness. The Zalosian way is assimilation. It is all we have ever known, but assimilation requires conquest, and conquest requires war. If we can find another way to survive, a way that doesn't require destroying other species, then we can stop being conquerors. We can become something else. Something else. Allies. Vextal's consciousness pulsed with hope. Your species is addicted to caffeine. My species is addicted to conquest. Perhaps we can help each other overcome our addictions. Dr. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then she extended her hand, a Terran gesture that Vextal had learned meant agreement. You have a deal, she said, but only if the Council agrees to stand down, only if they stop the invasion. Vextal nodded. I will make them understand. But Vextal knew that the Council would not understand. The Council was driven by fear, by pride, by the weight of 12 conquests. They would not abandon their way of life easily. They would not accept a compromise. Which was why Vextal had prepared another contingency. Enveth had betrayed the demonstration to the Council, but Enveth had also transmitted the footage to every Zalosian ship in the fleet. Every Zalosian had seen what caffeine could do to their kind. Every Zalosian knew that the humans were a threat that could not be conquered. And now Vextal was going to show them a different threat. A threat that the humans posed not just to the Zalosian species, but to everything they had ever known. Dr. Voss, Vextal said, I need you to transmit another message to Earth, a message that will change everything. What kind of message? A message that will show the humans exactly what they're up against. Vextal's tendrils curled with grim determination. A message that will make them understand that they have no choice but to fight. The battle for Earth was not a battle at all. When the Zalosian fleet arrived in the Sol system, they found themselves facing an enemy they could not comprehend. The humans had weaponized caffeine, not as a poison, but as a chemical barrier. They had filled the space around Earth with particles of concentrated caffeine, creating a cloud of neural destruction that surrounded their home world like a shield. The Zalosian fleet approached cautiously. They had seen the demonstration. They knew what caffeine could do, but they had also been ordered to conquer, and the Council's command was absolute. The first wave of ships entered the caffeine cloud. Their Zalosian crews dissolved within seconds, their neural tissue melting under the chemical assault. The ships drifted through the void, their organic components liquefying, their consciousnesses silenced. The second wave retreated. The third wave refused to advance. And the fourth wave, the wave that contained Enveth's ship, turned and fled. Vextal watched from the sovereign of flesh, their consciousness heavy with the weight of what they had done. They had given the humans the knowledge to defend themselves. They had shown the Council the true cost of their invasion, and they had, in doing so, broken the Zalosian will to conquer. The Council convened an emergency session. The speaker's consciousness was fractured, their tendrils trembling with shock. Commander Vextal, the speaker intoned, you have betrayed us. I have saved us. Vextal's voice was steady. The humans cannot be conquered. They cannot be assimilated. They are a species that has weaponized their own biology against us. Any attempt to conquer them will result in our complete annihilation. Then we must destroy them from orbit before they can. You cannot destroy them. Vextel transmitted the data from the Synthetic Host Project. They possess technology that could save us, technology that could give us a future without conquest, without war, without assimilation. The Council studied the data in silence. The Synthetic Host Project was audacious, an artificial neural substrate that could sustain Zalosian consciousness without the need for a host body. It was the future of their species. It was their only hope. The humans, the speaker said slowly, would help us develop this technology. They have agreed to a diplomatic exchange, a partnership, an alliance. Vextel's consciousness pulsed with hope. They are not our enemies, they are our equals, a species that has survived against impossible odds, a species that has turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, a species that is, in every way, worthy of our respect. The council was silent for a long moment. Then the speaker spoke. Then we will respect them. The speaker's consciousness pulsed with a decision that would change everything. The invasion is cancelled, the fleet will withdraw, and we will begin negotiations with the Terran species. We will find a new way, a better way. Vextel's tendrils curled with relief. They had done it. They had prevented a war. They had saved their species from extinction, and they had found an ally in the most unlikely place. Dr. Voss appeared at Vextel's side, her visual organs fixed on the bioscreen that displayed the Council's decision. They agreed. They agreed. The invasion is cancelled. Then we have a lot of work to do. The synthetic hosts won't build themselves. Dr. Voss nodded, a small smile crossing her features. I know, but I have a feeling we're going to get along just fine. Vextel extended a tendril, a gesture of friendship that they had learned from the humans. Dr. Voss accepted the gesture, her hand wrapping around the tendril with surprising gentleness. To the future, she said. To the future, Vextel replied. And together, the human and the Zalosian began the work of building a new future, a future without conquest, without war, without assimilation, a future where two species, impossibly different, could find common ground. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.